1, 2,
right,
1, go. Boom.
Hey, I'm Leo Birenberg.
I'm Zach Robinson. We are the composers of Cobra Kai on Netflix. We want to take you through one of our favorite cues in season 4. It's called Bonsai Badass.
This takes place during the All Valley tournament, the climactic battle for control of the karate universe. The two characters fighting are Sam and Tori, and they have a lot of history, so this fight is extremely high stakes. We're going to play the cue down, and then we'll break it down.
And fair warning that this does contain spoilers. If you have
Light
not
spoilers.
watched, if you have not watched Cobra Kai, you should watch all 39 episodes up until this moment.
Trust your instincts. Use everything you've learned from me. And Sensei learns. All of it. That's right. Every now and then. Back on your line, Larissa. About time.
Warning, that should be a point.
Massive.
This is like
I
one
love
of the
that.
tightest
I love
punches
that.
in the entire show. It also looks like it would hurt
I
so
know.
much. One thing that I think excites us about this cue is the score is such a blend of like giant action music, 80s rock, like 80s synth wave, and like really big cinematic orchestra. And this one kind of brings them all into like equal pull and push.
Absolutely. Our brief from the creators, John, Josh, and Hayden, was that the All Valley 51 was the kumite of the Valley. This was life and death. Everything, not literally, but that was the tone that they were trying to get across. So when we started writing for the tournament, everything had to be played as big, as epic, like in scope as possible.
I think one thing that's really specific about the tone of Cobra Kai is there's a lot of fun in it, in both the score, which we really try to achieve, and just the show in general. Like when you have teens throwing down in a mall, like fighting in karate, like there was an element of fun, even though it's very violent. And with this final tournament and this fight in particular, we wanted to suck the fun out of it and just make it feel as kind of aggressive and high stakes as possible. So that's a good starting point, because a lot of the sound at the very front of this is this extremely aggressive, processed percussion sound. There's kind of this non-stop 10/8 groove happening in this cue that we can just look at a little bit.
Yeah. And we'll be A-Bing between the mixed stems sometimes and the MIDI.
Some of our MIDI. The key in kind of building that sound is to have something that's taking away at every single like sub beat. So like I said, this is in 10/8. So you've got this like 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 thing, and you've got always something that's kind of going. And really a combination of stuff. We like layering a lot of different percussion so that we end up with
high, mid, low situation.
Yeah, and we like just having a layered sound that's not a layer you've heard in something else. And so here what we're mixing is kind of these like over-processed like action drums with something that sounds like a much less processed, just like taiko drum sound, because there is a lot of taiko drumming in this score, but in a more traditional Japanese way.
Right.
Which is
this.
Pretty
dry. You can really kind of feel the like soft, like the stick to the skin.
Exactly. And we kind of started with that and then add something a little fuller, and then you start emphasizing the accents of the rhythm that you want. And so this still sounds rather raw, and then we layer some of this in, and now it is basically our final sound. So once we kind of set up what the sound is, it gets bigger throughout the cue, but this is kind of our home base percussion then.
Something that we'll also talk about throughout this little lesson is pacing, and how we chose to like pace this fight, especially within the context of a large tournament. And I think that we would both say that starting off something with just percussion is kind of just a simple, fundamental way of like creating your foundation for a piece of big music. There's a lot to grow from percussion. So if you're ever lost or writer's block or anything, start with like creating a bed. Like that's what we do. Like just create a bed, a rhythm bed that gets you kind of bobbing your head a little bit, and you can only go up from there.
Right. It's so important to maintain the momentum in something like this, and that will help. Another big aspect of this cue is kind of the various synthesizer sounds coming in and out of it. And just like the percussion, they start out in this very kind of raw place and then become more melodic as things move on.
Here's where we start to kind of creep in our like Cobra Kai-ness, our sound, which, you know, has a lot of 80s style synths and aesthetics. Like this is where we start to underlay the standard kind of action movie bed drums with our synth bass.
So once you mix that with percussion, you've got kind of the bed.
Right.
Now you hear that synth bass in there too.
That's our foundation. And we actually have some orchestra on top of this.
Yes. So once that has been set up, you bring in the strings. Down low.
Down low.
Emphasizing that irregular pattern. So I'm gonna go back there and also add in our brass, which actually this is worth shouting out. When we record this, we record it as kind of isolated and striped as possible because it gives us a lot more mix control.
Can you mute the perk? Quick note about the material that you're actually hearing. So that's our score is highly thematic, and most of the motifs, whether it's like a string ostinato or a melodic theme like that, we have introduced those in previous seasons, previous episodes, and we're all about calling them back. So right now you're kind of hearing the string motif is kind of based off of their rivalry, Tori and Sam's rivalry that we established in season 2. So we're calling back to that. And then the melody you hear in the brass that we have up in the MIDI now is what we call, I guess we call it the Dojo from Hell theme, which is a callback to season 3, which is kind of like become a Tori theme, a Tori motif, and we have it in the brass for the first time. I think the brass has ever played it.
It's fun because this started out as like a heavy synth bass line.
Yeah.
And one thing that we really like doing is basically starting an idea in one part of our palette and then over time moving it into other parts. So like Zach said, this is the first time we've used this in the brass.
It'd be cool to kind of play the mock-up version, because this was one where we had to work with the brass a little bit. That's kind of a hard line to mock up.
So this is what that sounds like back when it was only samples. Cool.
Yeah. We had to emphasize, when we were recording live, we really had to emphasize that gliss to them.
Yeah. The one thing about a fight like this, and just in the way we approach a lot of Cobra Kai, is when you're in this tournament karate fight structure, there's points that they are earning against each other. And so each kind of point match becomes its own little cell of the composition. And so that thematic area we were just playing was really just the second point in this fight. And so we're always kind of looking for a way for like, what is the story of the fight and what is the story of this individual point, and like whose thematic material should we draw on to build that story.
And the wonderful thing about Cobra Kai is you never really know who to root for, and you are justified in rooting for either team.
Yes.
For whatever reason.
And everyone's changing teams
and everyone's
all the
changing
time.
teams. So we also cannot necessarily tip our hat musically to a certain, like Cobra Kai, the dojo is villainous this season, but Tori is not necessarily villainous. Like we have learned about her backstory, we have learned about her motivations, and it wasn't the right thing for us to do to play it as kind of like evil, as Tori getting those 2 points as like an evil kind of thing, but we had to keep the intensity. So it's this kind of like neutral tension, aggressiveness, I would say. It was kind of the first 50 seconds of 45 seconds, 50
of
seconds.
This fight.
Yeah.
Let's move on into this next bit, because the string figure you just heard come in, which goes like this. After this. So that is some material that we established back in season 2 when these two had a fight for the first time. And it was kind of this long building orchestral build that then culminated in them having like a showdown. And so here we're using that material in the strings as sort of a between points rebuilding momentum. And then, so we're kind of moving back and forth between this, like building the anticipation of the fight and then each round of the fight, which is a little more just like
Right.
primal.
Not to mention, and if you want to play it, there's a lot of dialogue that starts to happen.
Yes.
Now. In between fights when they're not talking and there's just a lot of grunting and karate sounds. There is a lot of dialogue setting up kind of these, as Leo said, like these cells that separate the fights themselves.
Nichols only needs one more point to win the championship for her and Cobra Kai.
I'm attacking, but it's not working. What style should I use?
Yours. Trust your instincts. Use everything you've learned from me and Sensei Lawrence. All of it.
That's right.
Back on your line, Russo.
So what you heard come in there is Sam's theme in the horns here. Which also took us into a nice, slick little key change. Up a step. Can't go wrong going up a whole step. It's just works every time.
And that's also something like just when you're composing in your own work, like dynamically it is important. We forget sometimes because we have control over our dialogue and our sound effects and everything and our DAWs, but it is important to score around the dialogue. And if a lot of people are talking, it can still be interesting,
out of the way.
but just stay out of the way, and less is more sometimes. So in this case, we really just have a very kind of like simple string ostinato with Sam's theme that builds and, brings us into one of our probably favorite parts in the entire season.
Sam as a character has a major arc this season where she is kind of training with two different dojos. She's training with both Daniel and Johnny, and she's kind of discovering what her personal style of karate is. And this is the moment where she learns how to put it together in one, and she goes into this extremely cool like kata sequence to like rev her into her final form.
If this was Dragon Ball,
Yeah.
like she would have like the fire and the power
Yes,
surrounding
and this would be
her.
a 2-episode power up.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I'm gonna play that bit and then we'll break it down because the cue starts to get a lot more melodic from here on out. This is also where it just starts to sound like Cobra Kai,
Right.
because we are bringing in guitars and drums, and there's a huge like hair metal influence, just metal in general, in this score, and especially when you start adding crazy time signatures, which we've now moved from like 12/8 or 10/8 to like 12/8 in this bit.
Yeah, like this is, as Leo just said, like this is where we kind of move into from our kind of like more conventional action movie template into sounding something a little more like our show and our sound, which we bring in the guitars, we bring in the bass, they bring in the drums, we bring in the kind of 80s synthesizer stuff. Especially we are very big into like the 80s Yamaha / Roland Bell sounds. That is kind of one of our big establishing kind of timbres that we use to say like, hey, we're referencing 80s movies and 80s soundtracks.
Do a little quick tour of some of those.
Exactly. The bells are a major part of this. This is the D50 Omnisphere patch, which is fantastic. So if you do a lot
Zach
of
has a hardware D50 in his studio, and it's become a major.
but something that we're big into using the soft synths because
Yeah.
like when you're scoring, you have a lot of notes and you need to address the notes, and sometimes you need to cut them up. A lot of the times we actually create. Can you bring up the MIDI for the ostinato? Because like sometimes, a lot of times, actually, we're creating ostinatos, like synth ostinatos on these kind of like bell patches or these kind of like Roland.
I have the guitar, bass, and drums going too.
I love this. And then sometimes, this one we actually never really did, but Terry Silver has kind of a bell ostinato theme, and then we put that in the strings in other places, or we'll have it on guitar or bass playing it. So we actually develop a lot of material from these
In the
types
bells.
of, in the bell world is for sure where it's happening. I love this, just, yeah.
We have a secondary bell part that kind of does.
I'm gonna grab my guitar. Talk about the Ewi a bit.
Yeah, so right when Sam snaps into her final form, you hear this. This synth shakuhachi flute, which is actually me playing it on Ewi.
Talk about
There's
this.
yeah. This is like I play an enormous amount of the Cobra Kai score on this instrument. It is not just shakuhachi. You can do it on I can run
There's
it
a
through
module.
tons of modules, tons of synths here. You can just send MIDI out of it. And I grew up as a woodwind player, so for me it's just natural to come up with ideas with this thing in my mouth. Like.
That's the jam.
That's the jam.
He's really an 80s fusion overlord.
Yes,
over
I
here.
know. It's really the life that I missed out on.
So also something is that I am a guitar player, Leo is a winds player. This show happens to feature a lot of both. So we get the opportunity, especially on cues like this, to have
Jam.
both, to jam, have the guitar, have the Ewi. Is this on?
I think so. No?
I think you need to input monitor it.
There we go. Should we jam on this?
I think we should jam. This is the first time we've ever jammed on this together
Together
in the same
in
room.
the same room.
Okay, 1, 2.
Do you want to play the melody or you?
Yeah, let's
really
both play
chug,
the melody.
man?
Let's both play the melody.
Okay.
1, 2,
right,
1, go. Boom.
I only play one phrase.
All right. Okay. All right. That was.
Play it.
You want me to
Give
play
us
the chug?
give us our drum riff.
So what we do. This is also another kind of thing that we love to do on Cobra Kai, where we take the show is so steeped in kind of like a rock and metal kind of like canon that we like to build our action beds off of kind of like rhythms that you would hear in that genre. So like especially coming from like a rock background, like taking something that you would hear in maybe like a hardcore breakdown. So like the rhythm and this is. And that's what we build off of. That's what the whole
Right.
cue builds off, or the cell, I should say.
This is gonna have the basically the rhythm section only. Like this is like a finished vibe by itself
Right.
for a different kind of score. And for us it is just the backbone
Backbone.
of something else. And from there, we build up, add those synths that the
Yeah.
bells that we were playing with earlier.
So this is no orchestra.
Still no orchestra. We can add the perk that we set up at the beginning of the cue. Slightly different rhythm now, but same thing. And then finally, the orchestra is added to the component to just give it that larger than life cinematic feeling.
Also kind of providing the melody, the strings. Nice, nailed it.
When you score a lot of karate fights, you got to hit a lot of punches.
Yeah.
And the way that you really need to think about it is you can't just be like, oh, they're punching and I'm gonna match every punch exactly. You have to like find the musical rhythm in what they're punching and then be like, okay, this is now my rhythm. How can I compose this into a piece of music? And so here, like, you know, we figured out that this accent pattern,
especially at the end, right?
naturally sets up like in that first cell and that last cell, it hits a lot of punches, including the final punch. And so then we kind of created that 3-bar phrase out of that. And it feels now like a piece of music that also hits everything else.
Right.
Yeah.
Can you go back to that section too that
Sure.
we were just looking at? I was wondering, like, something that we kind of also focus on in the if you want to look in the MIDI during this section. I actually don't remember if we had programmed like real drums / guitar.
I actually
bass.
don't think we did.
So sometimes what we'll do is let's play the MIDI.
Yeah, let's play
and you'll hear kind of what it sounded like before. Sometimes we'll kind of find later that like, oh, this is actually a good bed for a guitar bass drum combo. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's no guitar actually in the demo when we presented it. It's interesting because it feels like just as full and finished in a lot of ways, but it's not quite the show yet.
Yes.
And so that's something we record guitar, bass, drums, orchestra, percussion, like literally everything on this show. And so some stuff we just wait until the recording session to add.
Can you solo the drum stem, the final drum
Absolutely.
stem? Good way to give it like a live humanistic feel to our MIDI like percussion is we have our wonderful drummer Sam kind of doubling the tom pattern and giving it like a live rock feeling.
We're also obsessed with tom fills.
Yeah,
It's,
it fills
you know,
the space
yeah.
super well. And now, like narratively, the tide is turning. Sam, we think, got a point. She has found herself, but the point didn't count. She got the hit, the point didn't count. Tori went out of bounds. But she has awakened this beast inside her.
So we're going back to that same kind of anticipatory riff from that we were talking about before. We're at a much higher register now in the strings. Like one thing when you're writing for strings is register is everything in terms of storytelling, even within the context of like action riffing, quote unquote. You know, what's great about a string section is it is like a homogeneous sound from top to bottom. And so you can really do the same thing down low that you can up high and vice versa. And it's like a nice intensity slider as you are writing. There it is.
Yeah, so that melody is what you've heard already
In the brass
in the brass
earlier.
in the beginning, and this is kind of more where it was designed to be. I don't know if you can solo my guitar track down there, but this melody, the Dojo from Hell melody. Like that's a metal melody, but it was actually like more of like it was on synth bass before, and it was really slow.
It was really spooky.
But we've turned it into this kind of like action melody now. At this point, we've layered it with a bunch of. There's a bass, there's a guitar.
Yeah, there's a lot going on here. There's like a collection of synths all kind of playing this riff.
What I like about this cell too within the fight is that it actually is kind of transitional material that doesn't quite feel transitional because we have that melody. There's never really like a backbeat or a backbone. You're kind of like, everyone is playing along with the riff, kind of around the riff. And they're building and building and building to where we spotted the climax of this cell, Sam's like sideways double punch
Yes,
thing.
it might be fun to just kind of look at some of the synth sounds in
Yeah.
here, because there's a lot that goes in. I'm gonna leave your guitar solo
Yeah.
in case you want to play, but like the backbone of this, like again, we're using a lot of the processed percussion to double that melody.
Bum, bum, bum. Bum, bum, bum.
And same thing as before, it's just a huge mix of sounds. We've got just energy.
Right.
And that ARP is coming out of the Prophet over here. We have a couple synths that are doubling the guitars and the melody. And the idea there is to just like complicate the sound a little bit and give it like, because this idea first lived in like the synth bass world, we wanted to like blend that in there. And then there's just a lot of, some ear candy. Like this is the kind of a recurring suck sound that you've heard this entire time. And man, it's so great with that punch. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. You choosing on this show, as Leo said, we have to score a lot of karate, and we have to choose our punches wisely. There's a lot of punching. Which punches do we want? Obviously, this felt like a very natural punch.
I feel
to
like we did
accentuate.
some fun brass stuff in this section. Oh yeah. So like the horns and bones are like glissing down while some of them are flutter tunneling.
Was that mocked up?
All of them. That was the final. I'll play the mock-up now. It does not sound nearly as good, but
Bendy blasts.
trombone bendy blasts down here is. And you can see we actually drew in, it's a mix of like drawing in pitch bend, which sounds like awful if you just like do it on one patch by itself. But if you then layer it with something that isn't bending here, and in this case, I guess another thing that's not bending, and then something that's fluttering, like here, you basically can figure out what your intent is, and then when you can notate that down and you get into the recording session. I mean, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Lot going on.
these one synth thing we wanted to shout out right here. There's kind of a cool drop. Downer, one might call it. It's a great way to just build, like, to call attention to this,
Yeah.
like, very cool shot
Yes.
and pose that she
Simple.
is in context. It'll sound
So
like,
we actually,
Yeah.
real quick, like we use Ableton Live
A
Rewire
lot.
into Cubase a lot, and we actually use it a lot for this type of thing. If you want to flip over.
yeah,
to
so
Ableton.
this sound is basically made out of, like, one kind of, like, software instrument. So it's in here. There's part one, which is the downer itself. And then part two, which is the exhaust part of it.
Yeah.
And you can see we're using Ableton for a lot of transitional effects here. It's really easy in that program to like automate every single parameter. You can do like pitch modulation really easily. You can automate like the amount, like the wetness of the reverb, like as a sound is going on, so you can like create certain effects, like delays. It's all really awesome for, and we just we use it all the time in kind of a supplementary way.
Something that we like to do on this show too, especially in moments like this, as Leo said, we fill the space up. We like to fill the space with very subtle types of sounds. A lot of the way that like EDM kind of fills the space with subtle types of sounds. So we actually use a lot of kind of like EDM loop libraries and like sound effects that we grab. So special shout out to the Cashmere loop.
Yes.
We use these kind of like we call them like downlifters or exhausts or like white noise kind of washes that really just like help kind of. I like to call it glue. Like
Yeah.
it just like it glues things
I'll play
together.
like a couple of these transitions.
Yeah.
And so that is going on like during.
Yeah, the reverse with no reverb or echo tail, so like
Yes.
it fills the you get that ocean wash of like white noise space, and then it completely disappears, and there's a huge impact that you get from that.
I really like also how like that moment like sucks you back into like Sam has taken over the fight, and then
Yep.
it kind of sucks you back into reality with that impact.
Nice. And here, we're back into
headbanging.
we're headbanging. Like this is a rock breakdown. The feature is really of the guitar, bass, and drums.
Yes, like, and the percussion, like. You can hear the low strings in there getting in on. One thing we've learned is like string players, especially like bass and cello players, they love headbanging.
yeah.
And so if you give them like an interesting rhythm, they will get like really into it.
And since like we also like to get into a groove and settle into the groove. Like I think there's a lot of film scoring where you kind of like there's a habit of not always but of changing kind of constantly and like weird time signatures of weird bars and really trying to hit as much as possible in picture, and like we really like to find a groove, settle into it, and really like milk it as much as possible. Make it feel like a song, like really like it's not necessarily just a film score, like something that you can like
Yes.
bob your head to. and
Right,
just
you
get
want
in.
it to be awesome on the album.
Exactly.
And so like you don't want to be like, again, like mimicking punches for the sake of mimicking punches. You want to find the groove that mimics them. Got some fun stuff going on in the drums here as we're like building. Like basically the drum sound up until now has been extremely like tom based and kick drum based. And so finally we're bringing in like crash cymbals.
Crash, right. Adding crashes, open hi-hats, really simple way to escalate material.
It doesn't seem like a lot, but it adds so much in like those frequencies like way up high
Again,
of the
filling space.
cymbals. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like filling space, not unlike some of those synth sounds. Just back to kind of our rock bed. Actually, I think it'd be cool to actually play everything but the rock bed in this section and see what that kind of sounds like. What's cool about this is kind of like all the components we've set up throughout the previous like 2 minutes of music are all kind of coming together. You've got the brass bendies, you've got the rock bed, the percussion, which is like mimicking what the drums are doing, or maybe the drums are mimicking what the percussion is doing, is like back from the beginning of the cue, and you've got your strings headbanging like we were just saying. So it's kind of like all of those components are now like as you approach the final point.
Right.
Like,
Because
working
when we're writing
together.
this is a long sequence.
Yeah.
Like, and we're trying to figure out how do we escalate, how do we keep building and building, and there's these peaks and valleys as you've been seeing, like when they're fighting to when in between the rounds, what they're thinking, with all the dialogue and all that stuff. Like we have to continually build and build. We're obviously modulating. We're film composers. We modulate all the time. That's totally cool. But what I love about this
Put that
is
on a bumper sticker.
Yeah. What I love about this is that you muted the band instruments, and it sounded good, but it sounded kind of just a little standard.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
And we get asked a lot, kind of like, what's the like special sauce when it comes to mixing the band instruments with the orchestra. And the best example is this kind of moment where you really need to give it like an extra oomph and extra character, and you're doing what the band kind of does as a whole, like what it does best, which is provide a backbone.
Yes.
And this is like the prime example of it.
Yes. And then things get very big after that. Another exhaust sound there. Let's just kind of go bit by bit here. I want to highlight the orchestra for a second and just see what they're doing. Obviously a big tension build. We can take a look at some of the MIDI. This is kind of the first time in this piece, like, the orchestra's been in a very supporting role this whole time, and now finally, like, everyone's playing. One of the big color changes there is you finally hear trumpets. This is basically, you've got this rising bass line, and just kind of making, like, you're building the tension as kind of the notes get closer together and thus more dissonant as you're building to the end. Added to that is the percussion, obviously. And then the guitars and bass. Kind of in the same, like, filling space philosophy. I think the guitar is playing, like, just like long notes. It like serves the same purpose.
Yep. I think we want to also give a special shout out to our orchestra, the Budapest Scoring Orchestra, who did a phenomenal job on this score. There was a lot.
They played their minds out, like they do on every session, but this finale especially, which I think took us like 2 days to record, like 2 full days to record all this. We used an 80-piece orchestra, about I think 50 string players, 6 trombones, 8 horns, 3 trumpets. We might have done 2 tuba/chimbasa.
Yeah, we did on the finale.
Sometimes it's just fun to have like extra low end. And it's fun, especially because like you do a recording date and like it's not often you call for like 2 chimbasos, so they don't get to hang out that much. And then you get like both tuba players in the room and it's like, oh, great, cool. And then they just are so loud. Yeah, they crushed it.
So also narratively in this scene, like we're reaching kind of the end of not just this cue, but the end of kind of the first round of fighting. There's some more after this, but something that we have to work with the showrunners a lot on is talking about whose perspective the music is representing. So on this fight, again, this is kind of the first part of a longer fight. So we're really in this kind of neutral area, maybe tending to lean Sam because Sam is kind of, for all intents and purposes, a protagonist, and she's found herself after the whole season of struggling. But as I mentioned earlier, like you're in this constant gray area with who you're rooting for. So sometimes, not on this cue in particular, but we have the challenge of kind of like picking a side, whether it's a Tori or a Sam, a Cobra Kai or a Miyagi-Do, or a neutral, and sometimes we pick wrong. So sometimes we will score something with maybe a tilt towards one character or another, and the showrunners will come back and say, actually, like, we need you to like recalibrate.
You should hit this harder because like we actually want the audience to like empathize with them right here.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, like, the first portion of this fight, like Zach said, was Sam kind of finding her style. And so we're kind of with her for a minute. And what ends up happening is like Tori ends up accidentally hitting Sam in the eye. And actually, rather than being with Sam's perspective with that, the next cue, because all of these cues run into each other for about 40 straight minutes, the next cue is actually with Tori's perspective about like how she feels about accidentally like disabling her opponent, and whether that is going to make her like a clean victor or not if she wins. And so, and then we switch back again. Like that's just kind of the story of Cobra Kai, and the story of the tournament is you're rooting for everybody, and you want to be on everyone's journey equally.
Yeah. So that just takes us out. We build up into Tori hitting Sam, and one last exhaust to take us out.
And the next cue starts about right there.
Yep. That's Bonsai Badass.
Yeah,
That was fun.
that was extremely fun.
Thank you, Spitfire, for having Leo and I talk to you about this cue. It's one of our favorites. The show we love near and dear, and we love Spitfire. So this was really, it was an honor to spend the time with y'all.
If you haven't watched yet, and you want to check out this cue in context, watch all of season 4. This is in the finale, and season 5 drops at a
Sometime.
TBD date. So get excited.
Yeah. Should we shred
Thanks,
it one more
Zach.
time? Nice. Nailed that.